Thank you, Janzi. Good morning, everybody. So do you have a presentation ready? Okay, so I would like to share with you today Spire ADSB story. It's very personal to me because I probably could say that I was the first person being hired at Spire for aviation business. So I joined Spire about 4.5 years ago. And it was in a situation when Spire already had pretty mature AIS constellation. They just recently started with the radio occultation measurement from space for weather purposes. And their next step was to let's build ADSB. Cool. Okay, so as I said, I joined Spire around 2017, and it was a situation where there were some experiments already done on ground with a software-defined radio, with some ADSB antenna bought at eBay for £10. And it looked like it worked. So let's do it in space. And so with these experiments, there was no real FPGA code. There was no real software to control the satellite, to control the payload on the satellite. And it became my role to do that, to start building the team and write that software, basically. So I'm actually proud to say that there is still a piece of software that is flying in the space that I wrote 4 years ago, which is pretty exciting. So in 2018, we finally launched the first 3 ADSB satellites, and we got first data. And you might be interested, how did it look like? And this is the picture of the first data that we ever collected on a Spire ADSB capable satellite. So the color scale is altitude. So you can see some red dots there. I apologize for that graphics, because it's like the first dodgy way how we just quickly put some dots on the map. So you can see some red dots there, which is like 30,000 feet and above, which is not a surprise. You would expect to see it. But you can also see a lot of blue dots, which are very low altitudes. And there are even some ground positions that we were not able to decode that time. And it was pretty surprised, I must say. We expected we could see them. The link budget suggested that it would be maybe on the edge, but possible to see. But we were quite surprised that we saw so many of those. So it was like a first proof that was saying it's going to work. And then we put the satellites in production. I'll talk about it in a minute. But talking about satellites, you obviously would be interested how the satellite looked like. So this is the Spire LEMUR space platform. And I must say, this is a marketing picture. So this takes it's a picture of the better side of the satellite. Unfortunately, you do not see ADSB antenna there. The antenna, those white patches there that you see, is actually arrow antenna. The ADSB antenna is on the opposite side. And we use this picture because, as I said, it's a bit nicer when you look at the satellite from the other side. It's not that nice, put it that way. So I apologize for that. Unfortunately, you do not see ADSB antenna, but it looks very similar. Janzi already mentioned that Spire are doing AIS. We're also doing radio occultation from space. So our, I would say, a default satellite design currently includes all 3 payloads: ADSB, AIS, and RO. The size is 3U, so it means 10 times 10 centimeters and 30 centimeters high. Currently, we are doing platforms up to 6Us. I'm not sure if we already launched them, but we definitely are building them. And if not launched already, they'll be launched very soon. And the other interesting value I gave you here is the power of the satellite. So you have the idea what we are talking about on nanosatellites. It's about 20 watts. So you can see what you can do with 20 watts to run your computers, run your payload. So it's one of the restrictions that I'll be talking about when it comes to the automation of the payload operation. And yeah, it's actually one of the biggest constraints in this nanosatellite operation. So when we have satellite, we always need to put it to the space in some way. And this picture shows the Spire launch story. So since 2013, when the very first Spire satellite, I think the company wasn't even named Spire at the time, when it was launched, we worked with almost every single satellite launch provider in the world that was available in that time. So by the day, we have launched more than 110 satellites. It's probably going to be a bit more today. In altogether 29 launches, using 9 different types of rockets. So you can see those pictures there, and they are in scale, just in case you ask. These rockets are in scale. So even the tiny one in the middle, which is the Electron rocket, this is one what we use, and we're going to use it in a couple of weeks as well. So we use 10 different launch sites, and we launch out of 6 countries. So let's go back to our time scale, and let's move to 2019. We already had 8 satellites in production, and 2019 became probably the most satellite productive year in Spire history. We're basically building 1 satellite every week. And yeah, it was around 50 satellites that had been launched in 2019. And not only this, gave Glasgow a title, the city with the highest number of satellites being produced out of the United States. There's a bunch of other companies in Glasgow, but Spire by far is the largest one. So we had 8 satellites in production. So talking about these numbers, you may say, okay, we have 8 satellites in production. We launch 50 satellites. Where's the rest? When you launch the satellite and you do your check of your payload, you obviously see some varieties in performance. So now if you imagine that we have 3 different payloads, we always balance what is worth, which payload should be used, which payload should be prioritized, which is part of our let's say business case, that we balance the use of the satellite. So let's say if the ADS-B performance is not that good and the RO is exceptional, let's use the satellite for RO only, and vice versa. If we see that ADS-B works perfectly, RO maybe is a bit weaker, let's use the satellite exclusively for ADS-B. So having a bigger number of satellites, of course, you would need some sort of automation. You can't do the manual control and manual data download any longer. So we introduced, so it was across all the payloads, but specifically for ADS-B, because it was pretty new in production, we introduced the automated layers. So it means that all the plans, how the payload is controlled, how the ground stations contact the satellite, how they download the data, all was automated. So the plans were built typically a couple of days or weeks ahead, and then they just went on. So I still remember we've been in Glasgow at Kelvin Grove Park, and one of my colleagues, we had a barbecue there, which is a thing that you do in Kelvin Grove Park in Glasgow when it's summer. And one colleague just took his computer and some Wi-Fi dongle, and he was doing something, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was saying, "I'm on shift. I'm actually checking our satellites." It was just pretty exciting to see. So yeah, 2019, and then as we know, the pandemic hit 2020. The aviation industry just went down, and we already had enough satellites because early 2020, mid 2020, we already had certified satellites in production, in ADS-B production, and we're already be able to monitor the trends in the aviation industry, which is pretty exciting on one side to see that our constellation actually works, but pretty grim from the business perspective because just the whole aviation business stopped, which was nice to see. So we had some time to do some clever things with our payload. So again, I'm talking certified satellites. We already had around 60 satellites ADS-B capable. As I said, some of them better performance, some of them worse performance. So the certified satellites in the production, and now you can imagine, even if you do some planning ahead, certified satellites, it's pretty demanding how we're actually going to control it. So we took a slightly different approach, and we designed another layer on top of our automation, which was more business focused control. So the idea was, okay, we have 3 payloads, and we would like to collect ADS-B over these areas of interest. We would like to collect this many radio occultation profiles. We would like to collect this many AIS messages. We built a model where we put all these values into it. That model included all the performance parameters of the satellites, their orbits, the capabilities. I talked about power, the power capabilities, because as we grew, we changed the performance of the satellite, and for example, those 20 watts is the high value. The earlier satellites were maybe around 15 watts. So these things were all put into that model, and all those plans, all those all the inputs for that automated layer was done and is done today by this model. So it gives us a huge opportunity to no longer be satellite focused, but be more constellation focused. So, okay, we have the constellation of ADS-B satellites, take the maximum out of it. So now when we talk about this range of knowledge and experience that Spire have collected so far, so you would think, how could I use it, or would I use it? So imagine the scenario that you have the idea. You have the idea, I would like to receive this kind of signal from space, but I don't know how to build the antenna. I don't know how to build the electronics. I don't know how to build satellite. I have absolutely no idea how to launch the satellite. And I never controlled any satellite constellation. How am I going to do it? The scenario number 2, you have the antenna, you have your receiver, but you don't know how to build a satellite. You don't know how to launch it. You don't know how to control it. Or maybe you even know how to build a satellite. You have the idea how the satellite would look like, but again, you don't know how to launch it. You know who to call, to what your launch partner should be, how to control the constellation. So this is a new layer that Spire has introduced this year, which is called Spire Space Services. And all these 3 scenarios could be implemented in a way that you come to us and say, I would like to do this. And literally what you get in exchange is the token to your API. You connect to the API, you control your satellite, you control your constellation, and you get your data. And that's all what you need to do. So as is another level, and a completely different and unique in the nanosatellite industry that we are offering. And by the way, this is the way how we implemented the ADS-B constellation, the ADS-B payload. As I mentioned, the moment when we started with ADS-B, we already had quite mature AIS constellation. we had a lot of infrastructure in place, how to control the satellites, how to get the data. And we just implemented for ADS-B. And we implemented more or less along these lines, along this model. So, you know, it showed us that the approach that we took is pretty scalable. And we already have paying customers who use this model to launch their own payloads and their own satellites. So you may ask, what is next? Collecting all this knowledge, all this information that we have with the ADS-B constellation, we saw what the performance is. We got a feedback from our customers what they would like to see, and we see it's worth mentioning that the way how we launched the satellites was very opportunistic in very early stages of Spire. Basically, every single rocket that was able to accept nanosatellites as a share right, we just took it and launched the satellite, which is good if you start building your constellation and you need to have some mass in space. But then you realize that maybe if this orbit was slightly different inclination, maybe if these satellites were a bit closer to each other or maybe further apart, and obviously you end up with some more controlled and more purpose-built constellation. And this is where we are heading. And we are already finalizing the design of a new generation of ADS-B payload and ADS-B satellite. And early next year, we start launching a purpose-built constellation that is going to address the latency and revisit issues of the ADS-B. So the target is to achieve around 15 minutes latency and revisit in the first version. And it is not on these slides, it is not in this presentation, but it's in a future, maybe to go down to 5 minutes, 1 minute, and see where else we can go. So the plans are to have this constellation operational around 2023, where we're going to have enough satellites on orbit that there will be a visible value. Just to give you a glimpse, what are new features that we're going to have on our satellites is going to be active propulsion. Because when you see that picture of the satellite, it's basically just a piece of metal that is flying in the space. It has the orientation control, so we can orient the satellite in the space, but that's about it. The way how you can control the speed or the position, you know, separation of the satellites is basically just differential drift, which is sufficient for some applications, but it takes a long time. And given the limited lifespan of the satellite, you know, just doing 3 months differential drift to separate the satellites is not always the perfect thing. So we're going to have the active propulsion, and we're going to also equip those new satellites with inter-satellite link to address mainly the latency issue. So so we believe, as I said, that we can get very easily down to 15 minutes, and probably even 5 minutes would be with the first version of the satellite achievable on latency. So what we're going to address with this new constellation are really the use cases that are more closer to ATM than just, you know, collecting the ADS-B data from space and store it for historical purposes. So on this slide, you can see some ideas where we believe that this data would be valuable. So like a float management, overflight charges, analyzing the operational patterns, conflict avoidance, mainly going to the historic data, and the flight plan execution. And there's a lot of other ideas where this kind of data, this quality of data could actually work pretty well. So I got at the end of my presentation. I would like to ask my colleague, Philip Planhol, to add some words here.
Thank you, David. Yeah, like of course, this is from the technical side, and like I'm more on the strategy business development side. So I kind of stepped down from speaking there because I don't want to bore you with like my sales approach, how to sell that to the industry. But of course, like what is really interesting for us now is to find the different use cases, how the data can be used in ATM. And we are well aware of course, there's already someone in the market, and that market is kind of dominated by that one company. But we really feel like that there are lots of opportunities for let's say other solutions which might not need the same performance and can demonstrate the value to the ATM community. So that's something where I'm kind of very keen in seeing what the next 1-2 years can be done here with researchers together, and we hope that we can evolve quite well there. Like I think, as you can say here, we say there are more use cases, but some of them are really like down the niche, which might not be super easy for us to discover right hand. But of course, we're very open to have a collaborative approach with you all here to see like, okay, what could we do together? How could we maybe pull something together? So for that, we're obviously very open. And yeah, like we are looking forward to receive your questions and perhaps even have a conversation about like concerns you have with the ideas we are having. And yeah, happy for a chat. Thanks.